Noticing that the flowers on the windowsill had wilted after her mother-in-law's visit, the woman, amid her husband's laughter, decided to replant them. But as she dug deeper, bright rays of sunlight filled the kitchen with warm light, inviting a serene and leisurely meal. The aroma of freshly baked cherry pie mingled with a subtle hint of vanilla, creating a true symphony of flavors. Alyssa quickly set the table, anticipating some relaxation after a challenging culinary marathon. Today was Sunday, the day when Anita, her mother-in-law, visited. Her visits had long become a regular ritual, as unchanging as the seasons. Every Sunday around noon, Anita would appear at the doorstep to taste the dishes prepared by her daughter-in-law. Alyssa made every effort to please her mother-in-law, carefully selecting the menu, experimenting with new recipes, creating true culinary masterpieces. "Alyssa, dear, you are so talented." Anita's voice echoed in the hallway, such a lovely smell. "Hello," she replied, inviting her mother-in-law into the kitchen. "Please come in, the pie is just ready." The guest entered the kitchen with the grandeur typical of elder women. "How cozy it is here," she exclaimed, sitting down at the table, "and it's always so delicious." "Thank you," Alyssa responded shyly, placing the teapot and a plate of pies on the table. "I tried my best." Anita critically surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on every detail: the flower pots on the windowsill, a beautiful napkin, and the paintings adorning the walls. A casual conversation ensued at the table. Anita, as usual, inquired about the restaurant where Alyssa worked as an assistant chef. "Are the customers being fussy as usual?" the mother-in-law asked, biting into a piece of pie. "Yes, a little, but it's okay, I can't complain," Alyssa replied evasively. "And where is Stephen?" "I got so caught up with your wonderful dishes that I forgot about your son," Anita asked. "Oh, he might be at work again," Alyssa replied, placing a cup of coffee on the table. "He promised to be home soon, but even on a Sunday, they called him in for the quarterly report." "My hard-working boy," the mother smiled, accepting the cup. "He's good. It's just that his presence at home has been less than I'd like." Alyssa blushed. She didn't want to discuss this topic. She loved Stephen, and as his wife, it was important to her that he felt comfortable and loved. The guest smiled at the pie. "And what is this wonder?" "Cherry," Alyssa responded, slicing it. "I added some vanilla and cinnamon too." "Your favorite?" "Really?" Anita seemed oddly flustered, biting into a piece. "I actually prefer it with apple jam, but never mind, you are a true culinary genius anyway." Alyssa smiled. It was nice to hear praise from her mother-in-law. Lately, their relationship had warmed significantly, unlike before when they bickered like cat and dog. Now, they chatted about all sorts of little things: the weather, new TV shows, and everything else. However, Alyssa had to take a moment to give the restaurant director some contacts for good seafood suppliers over the phone, but Anita seemed not to notice her absence. "Does Stephen often talk about his work, his plans for life?" asked the mother-in-law, finishing her piece of pie. "Not really, to be honest, he's always busy. We've been meaning to see a doctor for weeks now," Alyssa sighed sadly. "You still should go, find the time. What's a family without children? Nowadays, medicine can do wonders. And you're still young, your age allows it," said the guest, standing up from the table. "Thank you for the delicious lunch, Alyssa. I should probably go now." "All right. I'll wrap up half the pie for you to take with you," said Alyssa, escorting her mother-in-law to the door. Once Anita had left, Alyssa breathed a sigh of relief. She returned to the kitchen to clean up after lunch when suddenly her gaze landed on the geranium pot on the windowsill. The flower looked wilted, as if it hadn't been watered for a long time. "Strange," she murmured, approaching the window. "I'm absolutely sure I watered it yesterday." Alyssa carefully inspected the soil in the pot, then gently dug with a small trowel. Something was off. And a second later, among the top of the roots, she noticed a small object resembling an elongated microphone. "What is this?" Her heart began to pound anxiously. She couldn't believe her eyes. "What is this device?" They sometimes show things like this in spy movies. A bug? No, it can't be nonsense. Or could it be? Stephen returned home an hour later. He was in a good mood, smiling, and even kissed her at the threshold. "How was lunch for the Queen?" he asked, undressing in the hallway. "I hope Mom was satisfied." "Everything was fine. She liked it," Alyssa replied, trying to act as if nothing had happened. "Well, who would doubt? She's crazy about your culinary magic." Alyssa took the geranium pot and went to the bathroom. "What happened to the flower?" asked Stephen, watching her. "It seemed fine before." "It started to wilt for some reason," replied Alyssa. "I think I'll change the soil, maybe it will recover." Her husband shrugged and struggled to suppress a chuckle. "I hope you don't think my mom drained all the life force from it with her presence." Alyssa frowned. "It's not funny, Stephen, everything has a reason." Soon she found another pot and special soil enriched with micronutrients in the pantry. Alyssa replanted the geranium, carefully extracting the roots and paying attention to the soil. But she found no more small objects resembling microphones, except for the one now resting in her pocket. Could it really be a bug, she thought, but why would my mother-in-law need this? After replanting the geranium, Alyssa grabbed the pot and quickly exited the bathroom. Stephen no longer asked about the flower and, of course, did not notice the worry in her eyes. In the evening, when her husband went to sleep, Alyssa took out the microphone again. In her hands, this small sinister object looked like an intruder in their peaceful life. Alyssa examined it, tormented by vague doubts. Who could have done this? And most importantly, why? Thoughts swirled in her head like a whirlwind. Stephen? No, it doesn't seem like him. He left home early in the morning and definitely didn't touch the flower. Anita? More likely. The mother-in-law could easily have placed the microphone there. When I was talking to the restaurant director? Alyssa realized that this mystery remained unsolved, and she decided not to tell Stephen about her discovery for now. She wanted to figure everything out herself and understand what was happening. Then, perhaps, she would find answers to all her questions. Alyssa hid the bug in a desk drawer, deciding to act cautiously, analyzing each of her steps and trying to find at least a hint of the truth. She no longer doubted that it was a listening device. The internet confirmed it, where she quickly found a similar device and read its specifications. According to the manufacturer, this gadget could record sound even when buried in loose soil up to 7 centimeters deep. So much for a mother-in-law's visit. But could Anita really be the one who did this? And if not her, then who? Alyssa whispered. She was afraid to confront her mother-in-law directly, fearing it might offend her. They had just reconciled. Was it worth breaking a fragile truce over some microphone from a pot? Maybe it didn't work at all? Deciding not to dwell on it, Alyssa went to the bedroom, where Stephen was already in deep sleep. But falling asleep was not as easy for her. Alyssa lay in bed, staring at one point. The darkness outside the window thickened, but sleep did not come. Fragments of the passing days spun in her mind, Anita's smile, her husband's mocking reaction, and, of course, the discovery in the flower pot. This small but creepy clue still did not let her rest. In the silence of the bedroom, to the rhythmic snoring of her husband, Alyssa inadvertently drifted into the past. Unwillingly, she found herself in a completely different place. She was only 7, sitting on the windowsill in her nursery, watching her beloved father busy with roses in the garden. It seemed like an unlikely hobby for a man, but he enjoyed it. His dark hair, already streaked with gray, was tousled by the wind. Patrick was always tall, well-built, with sharp facial features and amazingly kind eyes, a criminal defense lawyer, well known in town. Many desired his friendship, but he found solace in his family and his rose garden. "Dad, are you going to work today?" asked Alyssa in a clear childlike voice. "Yes, dear, absolutely. Today is an important case. I need to defend someone in trouble," her father replied, smiling. "What is a court?" the daughter persisted, trying to imagine this mysterious place. Well, it's a building where people resolve disputes, where truth and justice defeat evil. I am a defender of the good side, helping those who need help, those who cannot defend themselves, her father explained, sitting down beside her. Alyssa listened in awe, imagining her father standing in a beautiful hall, speaking eloquent words, and defeating villains with ease. Deep down, Alyssa dreamed of being just like him, to protect the weak and fight for truth. When I grow up, I will also be a lawyer, like you, she exclaimed, basking in her father's embrace. Of course, you are smart, talented, and therefore can achieve anything you want, Patrick proudly noted. Indeed, listen to your dad, he wouldn't steer you wrong, Mom remarked with a smile. But childhood, like a swiftly flowing river, swept away. Bright, joyful days were replaced by gloomy dusk. The screech of brakes on an icy road, the sound of an ambulance siren, the cries of witnesses in the hospital, and finally, a city cemetery with a fresh grave mound covered in mourning wreaths and a mountain of flowers. Alyssa forever remembered how she said goodbye to her mom, her little fingers clutching her hand. At that moment, she wished she could be a magician and turn back time to prevent the fatal accident that took her mom and left her dad wheelchair-bound. The accident broke Patrick. Alyssa, dear, you must stay strong. And remember, Mom dreamed of you being happy, he said at the discharge, trying not to notice the sympathetic looks from the doctors. His words were etched in her memory for life. Alyssa saw how he struggled, trying to stay strong for her and the bright future that the family lost in an instant. Even before the accident, Patrick wanted his daughter to become a lawyer, to continue his legacy, always emphasizing, Alyssa, you are capable of more. You are smart, perceptive. But over time, her tastes changed radically. I don't want to be a lawyer, Alyssa whispered, tears shimmering in her eyes. I want to bake pies and cook various delicacies. A culinary school, her father's voice was full of doubt. Are you sure? You could have been an outstanding lawyer. Continue my work. All the lawyers in our family were men, true, but does it really matter? You would have been the best of us. Well, maybe, Dad, but I want to be a chef. Well, then, I will support you, Patrick said quietly and a bit sadly. He knew that Alyssa wouldn't give up her dream, just as he himself hadn't after his first visit to the courtroom with his father. And Patrick did indeed support her, sitting in his wheelchair, helping his daughter cook, offering advice, reading culinary books. Deep down, he was proud of her, especially her perseverance and drive to achieve her goal. Alyssa remembered the trials they attended together. From the back of the courtroom, she watched as her father defended people, his voice sharp and confident. Alyssa, do you see? He would say, this is my craft. I defend the innocent and fight for the truth. Learn to see the essence and prove your point. Alyssa remembered how her father prepared for his last case, the one that coincided with her mother's death. It was a complex case involving a large company. This is very important to me. I want to win this trial, he told his wife at dinner. Patrick seemed to have thought through everything down to the smallest detail. Every word, every argument had been carefully considered. But in the courtroom, it all ended. The father lost perhaps the most important case of his life. From Patrick's face, it was clear he was broken, but not ready to accept defeat. Later, Alyssa often thought that perhaps this case indirectly caused the accident, although the commission found no connection between the lost trial and the tragedy on the road. Later, Alyssa graduated with honors from culinary school and went to work in a restaurant to begin her own culinary story. All these years, she remembered her father's words. The most important thing is that you are happy. And at that moment, she somehow remembered the first time she saw her future husband. Stephen entered the restaurant where she was working as an assistant chef, also filling in for the sick waitress Stella. Stephen appeared in the hall on a January evening as a snowstorm raged outside. It turned out that he had a date scheduled that day, but the girl didn't show up, and he was forced to dine alone. On the other hand, it was still better than returning home in distress. Hello, he said quietly, I'd like the venison medallions with wild berry sauce, please. Alyssa was amazed. This dish was so rarely ordered on their menu that she had almost forgotten it. It was made from rare, exotic types of berries and was quite expensive. Of course, we'll prepare everything right away, Alyssa smiled, feeling a light blush spread across her cheeks. She loved her job very much, and it gave her great pleasure to cook for people. She saw how the dish created by her hands not only delighted the guests, but also the waitresses, who consistently received good tips. "How's it going, Alyssa?" The voice of the chef snapped her out of her thoughts. "Good, Matthew, we have venison medallions ordered," she replied, immediately beginning to prepare the ingredients for the chef. Today, her duties included not only helping the chef, but also serving the guests. Finally, after Matthew worked his culinary magic, she was able to return to Stephen's table. "Enjoy your meal," Alyssa said, placing the order in front of him. Stephen carefully examined the dish. A mysterious glint appeared in his eyes. "Thank you," the young man said, and, taking his fork, carefully broke off a piece. For a while, as Alyssa spun around the kitchen like a hamster on a wheel, she occasionally glanced toward the dining area. Then, something happened that shocked not only her, but also all the other guests in the restaurant. Alyssa couldn't understand what was going on. The young man, who had placed the rare order, suddenly turned bright red and began to gasp for air. "Is something wrong?" she asked with concern, rushing over. "I feel awful. My throat. It's hard to breathe," Stephen coughed. Alyssa was horrified to see his face start to swell. Clearly, he was having an allergic reaction. She had seen something similar in her childhood when a bee stung her mother and her father had to call an ambulance. "Matthew," she called out to the chef. Fortunately, the chef came running at her call. He examined Stephen closely and reached for the phone in his pocket, but it was left in the kitchen. "Call an ambulance, and I'll turn off the oven." Alyssa found it hard to speak, her hands trembling with anxiety. She didn't know what to do and felt as if it was her fault. She had prepared the dish that caused such a severe reaction. "The ambulance is on its way. We'll be here in 5 minutes," Alyssa reported. She couldn't take her eyes off Stephen. He had turned pale, his lips were blue, and he was breathing with great difficulty. "Don't worry, the ambulance is almost here." She tried to speak in a calm voice, although her heart was literally tearing apart from anxiety. "Thank you," Stephen whispered. Alyssa held his hand, trying to calm herself as well. In the young man's eyes, she saw not only fear but also gratitude. "I've never experienced anything like this," he continued, pressing his hand to his chest. "Unfortunately, allergies are unpredictable," Alyssa replied, knowing each breath was difficult for him. "Oh, here are the doctors," she said with relief, seeing the ambulance. The paramedics quickly examined Stephen and, after administering medication to reduce the swelling, took him to the hospital. The rest of the shift was uneasy, and the atmosphere in the restaurant wasn't conducive to joy, as the guests still vividly remembered what had just happened. Alyssa had the next day off and decided to visit Stephen in the hospital. "Thank you, Alyssa," he said, smiling at her. "You seem to have saved my life." "I just did what I had to do," Alyssa replied, blushing with embarrassment. She smiled and closed her eyes, remembering Stephen's smile. At that moment, she forgot about the bug, her mother-in-law, and her suspicions. It was on that cool January day, in the hospital room, that Stephen confessed his love for her. It was simple. He took her hand and voiced what his heart had been whispering. After being discharged, the young couple met again and continued their relationship as a couple in love. When Stephen proposed, Alyssa agreed without hesitation. She loved him for his strength, intelligence, and great sense of humor, and was sure their love was forever, like her parents, full of harmony and understanding. But now, after several years, Alyssa was doubtful, unable to understand what was happening. Lately, her husband seemed to be replaced. He stayed at work more often, although, in her opinion, it wasn't necessary. The deputy director of procurement was indeed a responsible position, but not so much as to spend every weekend at work. Why is he acting so strange? Alyssa wondered to herself as she lay in bed. "Aren't you sleeping?" His voice interrupted her reminiscing. She abruptly opened her eyes. "Yeah, I just can't seem to fall asleep," Alyssa replied, trying to hide her agitation. "Is something wrong?" asked Stephen, picking up the smartphone lying on the bedside table. "No, everything's fine." "You're acting a bit strange today," her husband said, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "I hope it's not because of that plant you were repotting?" "No, of course not, just tired. I cook for clients at work, at home for your mom," she whispered, feeling his breath tickle her neck. "How about we go to the kitchen? Have some coffee since you can't sleep," Stephen suggested, kissing the top of her head. "No, thanks," Alyssa replied, closing her eyes. She couldn't mention the bug. "Not yet." "Well, let's sleep then," Stephen whispered, stroking her back. In the morning, her husband was already up and making coffee. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Morning, Steve. Why are you up so early?" Work, as always. I have a small business trip today. I want to be on the ball." "And you, I see, are still not quite yourself," he observed, watching her face. "Maybe take a break today? Or go out somewhere? To the movies, maybe?" Alyssa pursed her lips resentfully. "To the movies alone? No thanks." Stephen smirked, as if his wife had said something utterly foolish, like, "I'm the main breadwinner in the family, so what does it matter that I have a restaurant?" Although, in reality, Alyssa earned only slightly less than her husband, and her contribution to the family budget was quite significant. But it had always been this way. Unlike his wife, the role of the man in the family was often inflated, and if it did reflect reality, it was more of an exception than the rule. Alyssa had long noticed that Stephen was full of fuss but lacked substance. Sooner or later, all their conversations boiled down to one thing: talks about his work. But who would listen to Alyssa herself? Even her mother-in-law only came over to indulge in the latest culinary creation. No, of course, it couldn't be said that Anita didn't let them live or was interfering in someone else's family, not at all. It was just that, for the most part, she thought first of herself, then of her son, and only somewhere at the very end about her daughter-in-law. Alyssa's mother-in-law hardly interacted with her father, and in fact, they had only seen each other at the wedding. Patrick had deteriorated a lot recently, but he hadn't given up his beloved hobby of flowers, even after moving to a wheelchair. He knew full well that he would never be able to stand up again. The doctors had made it clear that with such injuries, miracles were not to be expected. To her shame, Alyssa rarely helped her father. She was at work all week, and on Sundays, she was busy in the kitchen. No, she could, of course, visit her dad on Saturdays, but that day usually ended up being filled with all sorts of household chores, starting with laundry, cleaning, and trips to the store. And Stephen was never around. Sometimes important contracts were burning, sometimes there were meetings with the boss. She had already gotten used to it, going to the store lightly and returning home with bags full of groceries, all for her beloved husband and mother-in-law. But Anita doesn't even remember what her favorite pie is, apple or cherry. But try not to bake it even once, and she'll immediately let you know she's offended, and she'll spend half the day pitting the stones. Since the strong coffee had somewhat cleared her mind, Alyssa decided to deal with the bugging first, and then with the household chores. "Stephen, I'm not going to work today," she announced, looking at her husband, who was having breakfast as if nothing had happened. "I have some days off, enough for a whole week. I want to visit Dad. I have an important matter with him." Stephen just shrugged. "All right," he replied indifferently, "have a good trip and say hi to your father-in-law." Her husband's indifference pierced her heart. As if it meant nothing to him, thought Alyssa, squeezing the small box with the listening device in her hand. Inspecting the device that morning, she found a miniature button to turn it off, and after a brief hesitation, she pressed it. Walking her husband to the door, Alyssa began to pack. She took some of the remaining pastries and then added some elite flower seeds, specially bought for her father from one of the online platforms. Stepping outside, she smiled at the bright autumn sun and hurried to the bus stop. The weather was nice, and her mood improved naturally. So what if her mother-in-law had given her such an unpleasant surprise? Is it really a problem? Who knows what went through Steven's mother's mind? Everyone has their quirks. Maybe, by installing this bugging, she didn't mean any harm. She was just bored and decided to follow her son's family to see how the young couple was living, what they were thinking, and what plans they were making for the future. The journey on the overcrowded bus felt endless. It was fortunate that she managed to snag a window seat. Watching the passers-by hurrying about their business, Alyssa turned on some music, but the song sounded unnatural, devoid of life. Thoughts about Steven tormented her, preventing her from concentrating. Why was her husband so cold with her? Was he hiding something? Suddenly, when the bus came to a stop at a traffic light, she saw him. Steven, smiling his most enchanting smile, was giving a bouquet of huge crimson roses to some stranger. A tall, slender woman with long red hair. Alyssa gripped the seat handles so tightly that the knuckles of her hands turned white. A little later, she saw Steven drive the red-haired beauty away in his car, leaving her alone with a bitter pain that was tearing her heart apart. How could he? How could he do this? Alyssa whispered, trying to hold back the tears that made it nearly impossible to see the world clearly. She couldn't get off the bus at the intersection. And where to go? Chase after her husband's car like a little dog? No, thank you. She simply couldn't endure such embarrassment. Deciding to call Steven, she repeatedly dialed his number on her smartphone screen. But the indifferent voice of the cellular operator informed her that the subscriber was temporarily unavailable or out of range. Struggling to reach the desired stop, Alyssa rushed to her father's house, as if hoping to find solace in his still strong embrace. Seeing his crying daughter at the doorstep, Patrick was very surprised, and then, without asking unnecessary questions, led her to the living room. "Dad." Alyssa breathed out, struggling to find the right words. "I need your help. I recently found this in a flower pot at home." She showed her father the listening device. Patrick carefully took the device into his hands, and his lips tightened into a thin line. He examined it from all sides and finally said, "This is serious, Alyssa. Someone is clearly watching you or your family. But why? We need to figure this out." Alyssa shrugged, understanding that she wouldn't be able to manage without her dad's acquaintances. Meanwhile, Patrick made a call. "Henry, my friend, hello. This is Patrick." Yes, your mentor in jurisprudence," Alyssa heard. "I have a matter for you. Come over." "Urgent, yes." Alyssa knew that Henry was the son of an old friend of her father's. A former police officer, now a private detective who was always ready to help when any of them needed assistance. 20 minutes later, Henry was already standing in the living room of their small, quiet house. "All right, tell me everything from the beginning to the end," the guest said, looking attentively at Alyssa. "What happened?" At the same time, Patrick gave the former police officer a meaningful look, letting him know that his daughter's safety was very important to him. Alyssa told everything, from discovering the bugging device to the scene with Steven and his red-haired beauty. "Yes, strange," Henry said, twirling the listening device in his hands. "Such devices are mainly used by intelligence or criminal organizations. Who would need to watch you? Do you know something?" "No, I don't know anything," Alyssa sobbed. "I'm just a regular cook. I don't bother anyone. I just live like everyone else." "But someone is still trying to interfere with that," Henry countered. "Maybe it's related to work or perhaps to your husband." "Steven?" Alyssa whispered. "Until we figure everything out, we can't rule out any options. Alyssa, I want you to be careful. Don't tell anyone about our meeting today. And perhaps you should leave the house for a while. We'll try to find the source of the signal from the listening device." "And where should I go? I don't even know myself." "I think," Henry said, "the best thing would be to spend some time at my place. I have a dacha far from the city in a quiet area. You can relax there and regain your composure. Don't worry, it was inherited from my grandmother." Alyssa looked at her father, Patrick, with embarrassment. "Dad, I didn't want to cause anyone any inconvenience." "And what will I tell Stephen?" "The main thing is not to say anything foolish," Patrick replied. "Your safety is the most important thing right now. Go to Henry, and we'll try to sort this out. And as for that scoundrel Stephen, I'll find something to say to him myself." Understanding that her father's decision in this matter was unquestionable, Alyssa nodded resignedly. "All right then. I'll buy you some groceries, give you the keys, and call a taxi. I can't come myself because of work. We'll stay in touch by phone or through your father, Patrick, that is," Henry concluded, slightly embarrassed. "Oh, come on. We're not in court, Uncle Patrick." The former lawyer smiled. Henry's dacha was located in a quiet, cozy area surrounded by pine forests. The house was small, wooden, with tall windows that offered a view of the endless field. Inside, there was an atmosphere of comfort and warmth. Alyssa felt that Henry had made every effort to ensure that guests felt comfortable. The house was filled with many books, old photographs, and smelled of wood. "Thank you," Alyssa said to him during one of their evening calls. "You're so kind." "It's nothing," Henry replied. "I just want you to be safe." The first few days at the dacha were extraordinary. Alyssa felt like she was in a fairy tale. Silence, birds singing, sun rays filtering through the pine branches. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm, cooked only for herself, read a lot, and walked in the forest. Once, while searching for mushrooms at the edge of the forest, Alyssa heard a faint whimper. Turning her head to the left, she noticed a small, frozen puppy hiding under a bush. It was tiny, with big sad eyes and ears like a spaniel's. Of course, Alyssa couldn't leave it alone and, picking it up, took it home. The little fluff became a true friend for her. Alyssa named him Shallowan because he always delighted her with his cheerful personality and genuine love. She took care of him, fed him, and even played with him. Shallowan became a bright ray of sunshine in the young woman's life, filling her heart with warmth. Life at the dacha went on its own course, measured and peaceful. During this time, Stephen didn't call even once, which indicated that Alyssa had made the right choice. Henry, on the other hand, visited her from time to time. They drank coffee and talked. She felt herself developing a genuine sympathy for Henry. The young detective was so attentive and caring. Deep down, she understood that she might even fall in love, but she wasn't sure if her feelings were mutual. Sometimes, when Henry stayed longer than usual, Alyssa would catch his intense gaze and see something more in his eyes than just friendly concern. It was both inspiring and troubling at the same time. What if she was just projecting her desires onto reality? What if Henry saw her not as a woman, but as someone to protect? "Alyssa," Henry said one evening when they were sitting on the veranda watching the sunset, "I want you to know. I'm very glad you came into my life. You've made it brighter, and so has Shallowan." A warm and very bright feeling fluttered in Alyssa's chest, and hope began to blossom in her heart. "I'm glad you're here too. You've given me such a sense of security," she replied, looking directly into his eyes. At that moment, all her suffering from Stephen's deceit faded into the background. She realized that life is beautiful and that even after the greatest sorrows, there's always room for happiness. Perhaps even for love. Alyssa was still bitter about the betrayal, but next to Henry, she felt safe. He was so caring and attentive. Whenever work allowed, he prepared delicious breakfasts for her, told stories about his investigations, and shared his thoughts and worries. Overall, Alyssa understood that moving to the dacha hadn't cost her anything. Moreover, she was able to take a break from her previous life, which, to put it mildly, had long been spiraling out of control. It was also surprising that during all this time, her mother-in-law hadn't called even once. Anita seemed to have vanished without a trace, no calls, not even texts. On the contrary, she had established a strong, trusting relationship with her father. They communicated via video calls almost every evening, sharing their most intimate thoughts. The former lawyer showed his daughter his rose garden and new flower specimens. She told her father about the antics of the puppy she had rescued. One warm November day, Henry called Alyssa, asking her to come to the city. She decided not to call a taxi and took the train instead. It was less hassle and much more convenient, and the longer ride wasn't a problem. There was plenty of free time and a small cart, and the positivity from the trip was much greater. Just sit and watch out the window, listening to the sound of the wheels. An hour later, in the park under the shade of sprawling maple trees, Alyssa finally met with Henry. His eyes were as kind as ever, but his gaze was stern and cautious. At that moment, Henry embodied the example of a person accustomed to facing dangers head-on. "Alyssa," the detective began, "we tracked the signal from the bugging device. It leads to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Apparently, that's where the control center is located." "And what now?" Alyssa asked, feeling her heart race with fear and curiosity. "Are you going there with Dad?" "But he's in a wheelchair." "Most likely," Henry replied, "but without Patrick, it's too dangerous. It might even be related to criminal activities. We don't know who might be there or what will happen when we meet them. One thing is clear, a normal person is unlikely to install a bugging device in their daughter-in-law's and son's house, especially with professional-grade equipment. It's beyond amateur work." "And Stephen?" she asked softly, "is he somehow involved?" "We can't say for sure yet. But there is some information that he might have been involved. Maybe he was dragged into this against his will, or he's been playing a double game all along, just like your mother-in-law." Henry's words pierced Alyssa's heart like shards of glass. She had never thought that the man she loved could be capable of such things. However, Stephen had already learned how to cheat, if he wanted to, as they say. "And what will happen next?" she asked, her voice full of despair. "What should I do? I don't know whom to trust. I'll try to find out as much as I can." "Don't lose hope," Henry said. "We will find answers to your questions. The most important thing right now is your safety. Stay at the dacha and don't go out unless necessary." Suddenly, the sound of a child's cry came from deep within the park. "What is that?" Alyssa asked, looking down the alley. "I don't know, let's go see," Henry replied, and they headed toward the source of the sound. Deep inside, under the dense branches of old chestnut trees, stood a lone baby stroller of the winter enclosed type. Alyssa hurried over and saw a small baby wrapped in a warm blanket. He was so tiny, with tender cheeks and large, dark blue eyes filled with fear and loneliness. His little lips were slightly parted, and his tiny hands were clenched into fists. He was crying, weak and defenseless. At the bottom of the stroller, there was a note. "Please help. I can no longer take care of my child. I beg you, take him. Give him a home, love, warmth. His name is Michael. Forgive me, kind people. And you forgive me too, Michael." Tears rolled down Alyssa's cheeks. She gently took the baby into her arms. Warm and so very small, he pressed against her as though she were his own mother. His tiny body was warm and fragile, like a toy doll from her childhood. "Poor little one, what should we do?" Alyssa whispered. "He needs help," said Henry, looking at the child. "I'll help. We'll contact child services, and they'll place him in an infant care home." Alyssa looked at the baby again, and something tender and powerful, something like love, was born in her heart. "No need for an infant home. I want to keep him for myself, since his own mother gave him up," Alyssa whispered. "I'll take care of him as if he were my own." Henry smiled, a smile that was gentle and warm like a ray of sunshine. "Well then, we'll do everything possible to make that happen. I'll help you with the paperwork," he said, pushing the stroller ahead of him like a natural father. Alyssa held the little one close, whispering tender, affectionate words. After all, what in life can compare to the happiness of motherhood? At that moment, everything else faded into the background, the secrets of her mother-in-law, and the affairs of her husband, who had betrayed her so shamelessly. Patrick greeted the news of a possible grandchild with great joy. "Michael, what a good name. Don't doubt yourself, my daughter. If anything, I'll help you with the paperwork. I'm sure the little one will be happy, said the former lawyer. After all, he'll have such a loving mother. His eyes shone with happiness. The baby's mother was identified quickly. She turned out to be a girl from the provinces who had come to the city, only to be abandoned by her fiancé. She hadn't dared to give up the baby right in the maternity ward, but after being discharged, realizing what lay ahead for her, she left the stroller in the park. No criminal charges were brought against her since the unfortunate woman lost her mind after everything that happened and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. Now, even if she recovers, she will still be deprived of parental rights. Besides, she herself did not hide the fact that she wanted her son to go to an orphanage. Thanks to some connections, they even found and shamed the young man who had abandoned his pregnant fiancée. He denied his paternity and considered the baby to be illegitimate. But Alyssa didn't care about that at all, because now there was finally a child in her life, someone worth living for and showering with love. A small segment about this case even aired on the local television channel, making Alyssa a brief local celebrity. The days spent waiting for the end of the investigation passed very slowly, but Henry worked diligently, studying Stephen's business, contacts, and all the details of his life. Soon, the first pieces of evidence emerged. The first person he decided to share the results with was, of course, Alyssa. The private detective entered the room and, trying not to wake the sleeping Michael in his crib, got straight to the point. To say that Alyssa was shocked would be an understatement. "This is Olivia Keat," Henry said, showing her a photograph of a woman who looked exactly like her mother-in-law. Anita's twin sister. No one knew about her before, and she was the first to contact her more successful sister. "Sister?" Alyssa whispered. "How is that possible? What is this? A joke? Am I supposed to laugh now?" They were separated in the orphanage many years ago. In simpler terms, the twin orphan girls were placed in different families due to the fault of the orphanage director. Henry continued, "Recently, Olivia found Anita and began periodically living her life. In reality, she is the widow of a criminal authority who wanted to take over Stephen's employer's business." Alyssa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Lately, her so-called mother-in-law wasn't the real one but a cunning and dangerous woman hiding her true intentions. "We have been bugging her," Henry continued, "and now, together with my colleagues, we are preparing for an operation to detain her." "But how could she replace my mother-in-law so easily?" Alyssa was astonished. "Luck helped. Anita just happened to be hospitalized with hypertension," Henry replied. "Olivia took advantage of the situation and came to you on Sunday, as usual. To your daughter-in-law for pies, so to speak. Only the real goal of this fake mother-in-law was quite different. And I didn't even suspect it. I was also wondering why she forgot about her favorite cherry pie." Alyssa said. "Everything will be all right," Henry comforted her. "We will soon detain the impostor and find out everything. But now, sorry, I have to go back." Alyssa escorted him to the door, then sat by Michael's crib. Later that evening, Henry called and said with satisfaction, "Well, you can congratulate us, we have detained Olivia." "And how did it go?" "Tell me, I'm curious," Alyssa asked. "We bugged her. She met with several people, presumably her gang, and we decided that it was the best time to detain her." "Wow, a whole gang?" Alyssa was amazed. "Yes, indeed," the detective continued. "Olivia, of course, didn't expect an attack. When we showed her the arrest warrant, she froze. She tried to deny it, said she knew nothing, but we had evidence. We found documents in her apartment confirming that she was indeed the widow of a criminal authority and engaged in raider takeovers." "So, Stephen isn't guilty?" Alyssa asked, struggling to contain her anxiety. "Well, to some extent, he could have become a victim himself. After all, in the phone of the twin sister, Stephen's mother, we found recordings of conversations with various people where she talked about plans to take over the business of the company, the very one where your husband works. All the evidence was there. Olivia was found guilty, and she's now in pretrial detention, Henry concluded. Alyssa still couldn't believe that she had been deceived all this time. But on the other hand, she was happy that the truth had finally been revealed. "Thank you, Henry," she said. "You're welcome. Glad I could help." After that, Alyssa was finally able to return to her father's house. It hadn't been easy for her after everything, but she decided not to lose hope and finally understood that life is full of unpredictable surprises, but it's important not to lose hope. Of course, deep down, it was still painful after the proven fact of her husband's infidelity, but at the same time, she realized that the unfaithful Stephen was not worth her tears. She met another man, kind and attentive, who sincerely and wholeheartedly loved her with all his heart. Now she faced a painful divorce from Stephen, who, although he turned out not to be involved in the bugging story, still, in Patrick's opinion, deserved his portion of justice. On the appointed day, the courtroom was full. Alyssa, dressed in a simple but perfectly fitting sea green dress, felt uncomfortable. Next to her, sitting in a wheelchair, was Patrick. Today, her father was the pillar of Alyssa's defense in this cruel spectacle called divorce. Stephen, the unfaithful husband, stood by the opposite wall. His usually confident posture had slumped, his eyes darted around the room as if trying to find even the slightest hope for salvation. Next to him stood a red-haired flirt, the very same one he met on the street with a bouquet, who became the reason for the family's collapse. Alyssa didn't know the mistress's name, but she felt her arrogant gaze on herself. Anita did not appear in court, as she had been discharged from the clinic the other day and was following the regimen prescribed by doctors. The case of the Douglas divorce, Alyssa and Stephen, is now in session, announced the judge, a tall man with a masculine, determined chin. His voice was steady and impartial, like a verdict. Alyssa took a deep breath, trying to quell the tremor in her hands. She knew that today she would have to say many words and, first and foremost, the truth that she had been hiding from herself for so long. "Alyssa," the judge began, "you have filed for divorce, requesting to deprive your husband of the right to the residence, which is your joint property. State the reason for your decision." "Yes, Your Honor," Alyssa lifted her head, "I am filing for divorce due to his infidelity. Because Stephen deliberately and systematically disrupted our family relations, humiliated me, destroyed my life." "Stephen," the judge addressed the husband, "do you admit guilt to the charges brought against you?" Stephen remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. "These are just fabrications," he exclaimed defiantly. "Alyssa has always been jealous, and now she's just looking for a reason to divorce to take everything for herself." Stephen's arguments are unfounded, Patrick intervened, and his resonant, agitated voice filled the entire courtroom. "The evidence of my son-in-law's infidelity is irrefutable." A listening device installed in the flower pot of his Aunt Olivia Keek captured conversations with the mistress. "Additionally, we have witness testimonies confirming the act of infidelity." "Dad," Alyssa whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "No, you don't need to, you're all ready." "Quiet, dear," Patrick squeezed her hand, "I'm here for you." The court presented the evidence submitted by the plaintiff. The judge turned to Stephen. "Stephen, do you acknowledge the authenticity of the audio recordings?" "It's a forgery." The man firmly spat out, "I don't recognize this." "Stephen," the judge lightly pounded the gavel, "your words are not supported by any facts. Additionally, your actions have caused moral damage to your wife. The court is deciding to dissolve the marriage." A whisper went through the courtroom. Some expressed sympathy for Alyssa, while others showed condemnation. Stephen looked at his ex-wife, and confusion and misunderstanding were evident in his eyes. "Stephen, you are being deprived of the right to reside in your shared apartment," the judge continued. "The apartment transfers to full ownership of Alyssa, as a larger contribution towards the mortgage was made using her father's money." Stephen's face contorted with anger. He looked at the mistress, who stood there with pursed lips, her face displaying a mixture of surprise and disdain. "What are you doing?" Stephen hissed, "You promised." "And who are you?" The woman threw her purse over her shoulder. A destitute, abandoned husband? I have no reason to waste time on you anymore. She turned around and left the courtroom as if she had never been there. Stephen, left alone, felt abandoned and humiliated. His pride was shattered into pieces, and his eyes no longer held the confidence and authority that had once been an integral part of his image. "The session is adjourned," said the judge, and pounded the gavel. Patrick helped Alyssa to stand, offering his shoulder. "We did it," he said in a calm voice. "Now you are starting a new life." "Yes, Dad," Alyssa smiled at him. "Thank you for everything." Leaving the building, Alyssa felt the fresh air caress her face, and the sun breaking through the clouds filled her heart with hope. Henry was waiting for them at home with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. "Alyssa, I would like to ask you about what is most important to me right now. You have come out of a very difficult situation, and I am very proud of you." After saying that, he handed her the bouquet of flowers. "You are very dear to me. I fell in love with you literally at first sight. I see in you a strong, tender, caring, intelligent woman. I want to be with you forever." Alyssa's cheeks flushed. Patrick tactfully moved aside in his wheelchair. "Henry, I love you too." "Well, then marry me," Henry said, looking directly into her eyes. Alyssa nodded, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Henry held her close, and Alyssa felt the incredible warmth of his embrace. In this warmth, she found what she had been missing so much: love, protection, and peace. Soon they tied the knot. The wedding was modest, but at the same time full of homely coziness, love, and happiness. Little Michael had by then become their legitimate son, and the puppy delighted everyone with its loud barking. Alyssa knew that ahead of them lay a long and happy journey.